Good afternoon, folks. My name is Alex. This is the Free the People Free Press podcast. This is our 7th program. Tonight we are going to be covering compensation for labor. Labor is not income. But first I want to address a couple comments I've had. A lot of people tell me, I can't sit and look at a black screen for 20 minutes or, it's nothing to keep my attention. I'm losing interest. Well, I understand that, and that's understandable. It is tough to sit and listen to something for an extended period of time if you haven't really trained yourself to do so. It took me a really long time to be able to sit down and listen to something for an hour straight and listen to every single word of what I'm hearing. But we're going to take a short break here and stay with us. We'll be right back, and we're going to get this covered. It's a very important topic. We're going to continue with the education and sovereignty, and hopefully some of this will start to come clear.
A bureaucrat woke up one day with nothing much to do. He tried to put his street clothes on but couldn't find his shoe. The night before he tied one on, now cobwebs filled his head. By afternoon he called in sick and then went back to bed. The next day he felt shaky, but he made it off to work and voted to increase his pay and take another perk. Although the people cried out loud and told him what to do, instead of trying to cut the costs, he increased revenue. Yippee-yi-yo! Tax hikes are on the way. And he said, tax 'em, tax 'em, tax 'em, though it breaks their backs 'em. Tax 'em where they run, where they hide. In winter's freezing weather, if we can't tax their sweater, we'll try to tax the hair off their hide. My congressman just voted yes to increase foreign aid. Although our nation's infrastructure's worn and torn and frayed, while veterans and nation sons become the unemployed, since NAFTA passed those aliens will gladly fill the void. Yippee-yi-yo! Yippee-yi-yay! Vengeance is on the way. I say we hang 'em, hang 'em, hang 'em, till their toes are dangling. Stretch those faders' necks, hang 'em high. Before they up and bust us, let's use old-fashioned justice and go out and get a rope and hang 'em high. My senator just voted yes to pass the Brady bill. He thinks if he can take my guns, it's him that won't be killed. He doesn't give a hang about the crime he helps create, as long as bribes keep coming in. Americans can wait. Yippee-yi-yo! Yippee-yi-way! Vengeance is on the way.
Yes, folks, all of you who followed Donald Trump and thought you would be getting tax cuts as he stated during the campaign trail, I can assure you, tax hikes are on the way. Make no mistake about that. Make no mistake about that. Quote, income should include profit gained through a sale or conversion of capital assets. There would seem to be no room to doubt that the word must be given the same meaning in all of the income tax acts of Congress that it was given to it in the Constitution that was given to it in the Corporation Excise Tax Act, and what that meaning is has now become definitely settled by decisions of this court. In determining the definition of the word income thus arrived at, this court has consistently refused to enter into the refinements of lexicographers or economists, and has approved in the definitions quoted what is believed to be the commonly understood meaning of the term, which must have been in the minds of the people when they adopted the 16th Amendment to the Constitution. End quote. The following is from the 1913 Congressional Record, page 3843 and 3844, from Senator Albert B. Cummins. Quote, I want to make a lawyer's argument that the authority of the Congress of the United States with regard to this subject is not unlimited. Our authority is to levy a tax upon incomes. I take it that every lawyer will agree with me in the conclusion that we cannot levy under this amendment a tax on anything but income. I assume that every lawyer will agree with me that we cannot legislatively interpret the meaning of the word income. That is a purely judicial matter. The word income has a well-defined meaning before the amendment of the Constitution was adopted. It has been defined in all of the courts of this country as gains and profits. The people of the country granted to Congress the legal meaning and interpretation of the word income as it was then and as it might thereafter be defined or understood in legal procedure. If we could call anything that we pleased income, we could obliterate all the distinction between income and principal. The Congress cannot affect the meaning of the word income by any legislation whatsoever. Obviously, the people of this country did not intend to give Congress the power to levy a direct tax upon all of the property of this country without apportionment. Unquote. Jeffrey A. Dick Stein is one of the most well-respected and educated constitutional tax experts in America. Following is a summary of his findings regarding how the word income is defined. Quote, income has been defined by the Supreme Court to be a profits or gain derived from various sources. A tax directly on the source is a direct tax and must still be apportioned. A tax on the income derived from the source need not be apportioned. The labor contract, and the right to sell labor have all been held by the Supreme Court to constitute property. The procedure to determine if there is a gain derived from the sale of property has been set forth by Congress. Gain is derived only if one receives over and above the fair market value of the cost of the property. These basic principles are simple to state and simple to apply. They also lead to one inescapable conclusion. Compensation for labor earned by citizens of the 50 states working for the private sector in the 50 states does not constitute income taxable by the federal government. It is not federal taxable income. Therefore, compensation for labor is not income. Understanding that income is not everything that comes in, but only gains and profits severed from capital, is a simple matter to deduce that compensation is not income in the true and lawful meaning of the word. Compensation is defined as, quote, giving an equivalent or substitute of equal value, giving back an equivalent in either money, which is but the measure of value, end quote. And that is taken from the Black's Law Dictionary. Because by its true definition, compensation is an equivalent and equal exchange, there is no profit, there is no gain, and therefore there is no income. Are you understanding what you're hearing, folks? You gotta step back and take a second and think about that. You can, and you may need to. Compensation is an equal and equivalent exchange. There is no profit, there is no gain, and therefore there is no income. Quote, there is a clear distinction between profit and wages and compensation for labor. Compensation for labor cannot be regarded as profit within the meaning of the law. The word profit, as ordinarily used, means the gain made upon any business or investment, a different thing altogether from mere compensation for labor, unquote. And that is taken from the case Oliver versus Halstead. Quote, reasonable compensation for labor or services rendered is not profit, end quote. Laurel Dell Cemetery Association versus Matthews. In compensation for labor, there is an even exchange of time for an equal amount of money. It's an even barter. It would be no different than trading a bushel of wheat for a bushel of rye, which were both the same price. There would be no gain or profit. If you provide $100 of labor for an equivalent $100 of pay, there is no gain, there is no profit, and therefore there is no income. Quote, Congress has taxed income, not compensation, end quote. That's from Connor versus U.S. Quote, the phraseology of Form 1040 is somewhat obscure, but it matters little what the form says. The statute, and the statute alone, determines what is income to be taxed. It taxes income derived from many different sources. One does not derive income by rendering services and charging for them. That's from Edwards versus Keith. Webster's dictionary defines derived as to obtain from a parent substance. The property or compensation would be the parent substance, and the gain or profit would be a separate derivative obtained from the substance, property or compensation. From means to show removal or separation. Do not confuse compensation for labor with wages or compensation for personal services, which are only earned by government officers and employees and are includable in gross income under Title 26. You understand that, folks? Those of you who work for the government that are listening to this, because I know you are, you do have to pay income tax. This will be explained further. However, compensation for labor earned by American citizens in any of the 50 states working in the private sector is a different thing altogether and is not taxable wages and is excludable from gross income and is exempt from the graduated income tax. To understand the tax codes, you must start with the original 1939 Internal Revenue Code. This code combined all previous revenue laws into one code and repealed all previous laws not included in the 39 code. However, statutes and codes which were enacted after the 1930 code are still in force, if not specifically repealed or amended by subsequent statutes, codes, or regulations. That means that all portions of the 1939 and 1954 codes and regulations, the Public Salary Act, etc., not repealed, are still part of the overall tax code and regulations, even though they may have never been transferred into the subsequent codes. The strategy of the government is to call anything that comes in gross income. Then, to keep the code in harmony with the Constitution of law, the writers of tax legislation create exemptions and exclusions from gross income for the exercise of rights protected by the Constitution. These are buried in previous acts and regulations that were never repealed but were not brought forward to the most recent code. The other problem is that most citizens, including lawyers, accountants, and CPAs, who are technically enrolled agents for the IRS, are not taught in government schools and therefore are not aware that is the regulations and not the broad and general language of the code that implement the law. After the enactment of the Internal Revenue Code of 1939 and before the 1954 Code, Congress passed the Public Salary Act. This act is the foundation of all federal and state individual income tax codes and regulations. Because this act is buried between the 1939 Code and the 1954 Code, many citizens are not even aware it exists. The following section of that act has never been repealed. This act is extremely significant because it amends and redefines gross income, which is the basis for calculating taxable income, to include only compensation for services as public servants earned by federal government employees to mean, in statutory construction, the word including means only and cannot be expanded to add other elements not within the exact meaning of the definition. The meaning here is public government employees and cannot be expanded to also include private sector employees. Public Salary Act of 1939, Title I, Section 1, Section 22A of the Internal Revenue Code relating to the definition of gross income is amended after the words, quote, compensation for personal service, end quote, the following, quote, including personal service as an officer or employee of a state or any political subdivision thereof, or any agency or instrumentality of anyone or more of the following, end quote, of the foregoing, end quote. Wages and compensation for personal services are only earned by federal government employees. This is why the government argues wages are gross income. According to their definition, they're right. However, compensation for labor in the private sector is not wages and not compensation for personal services. Compensation earned in the exercise of our right to labor is exempt from gross income. We've already learned this. We also know that only federal government employees have wages and compensation for services, which are to be included in the calculation of gross income. At the same time that the Corporate Tax Act of 1909 was being enacted, the 16th Amendment was proposed. The 16th Amendment was an unsuccessful attempt to try and negate the Pollock decision that direct taxes without apportionment were unconstitutional. Congress, in conjunction with the 50 states, had in the past overturned Supreme Court decisions by amending the Constitution. The 11th, 14th, and 26th Amendments to the Constitution reversed specific Supreme Court rulings. However, an amendment cannot overturn another clause in the Constitution, which is the supreme law, unless the conflicting clause is repealed. For example, the 21st Amendment, which repeals the 18th Amendment prohibition on liquor, reads, quote, the 18th article of amendment to the Constitution of the United States is hereby repealed, end quote. There is no 18th article of amendment of the Constitution of the United States I'm sorry. There is no such wording in the 16th Amendment repealing Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, or Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4, the apportionment clauses. The United States Constitution cannot be in conflict with itself. The 16th Amendment makes no reference to direct taxes, and therefore the Supreme Court has ruled, as documented herein, that the 16th Amendment is applicable only to indirect and excise taxes and not to direct taxes. That means that income taxes can never be imposed on any type of property. Sorry about that, folks. Got a little bit of a dry throat here. The unscrupulous drafters of the 16th Amendment did have the unrealized intention of changing our Constitution. The first three drafts to the 16th Amendment were written with the words direct taxes. Joint Resolution number 39, which is the original wording for the 16th Amendment, which was never approved by Congress, reads as follows. Quote, the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect direct taxes on incomes without apportionment among the several states according to the population, unquote. Congress refused to pass an amendment so worded because it was contradictory to the basic principles and ideals of the Constitution. Therefore, the 16th Amendment was changed to read, quote, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without apportionment among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration, end quote. Note the conspicuous absence of the word direct and the addition of the words from whatever source derived. When the word direct was deleted, the amendment was left applicable only to indirect taxes. The Supreme Court ruled that in the 1916 case, the Bushraber case, that the 16th Amendment can only be applicable to indirect taxes because those were the only taxes that could be lawfully imposed without apportionment. Also, the words from whatever source derived means separated from the parent substance source. The real lawful definition of income has absolutely nothing to do with the remuneration for compensation for labor. Income is only profits and gains after they are separated or severed from the capital, property, or compensation. It is only the severed gains and profits and not the principal or source that can be taxed as an excise. And that's something to think about tonight, folks. We'll get back into it soon. I'm busy doing this when I can.
Some call me MIA. Some say I can't go home again. Some say I chose to stay. I am the unknown soldier who you refuse to know. A brother and a friend of yours who left so long ago. Some call me POW, the one they left behind. I am the unknown soldier, the one they never tried to find, the one they never tried to find. I'm a farmer from Missouri, the soldier from St. Paul. I was the hero of my family, and still my picture's upon their wall. I'm a poet and a scholar, and the boy who lived next door. I am the unknown soldier, forgotten on a foreign shore, long forgotten on a foreign shore. I was someone's loving daddy, I was someone's pride and joy, I was someone's tender lover, a worried mama's little boy. And if you should just forget me here, then should I forget you too? Please won't you try to bring me home? For I'm someone who belongs to you, I'm still someone who belongs to you. I am the unknown soldier with no more tears to shed. I'm just a fading memory, a part of the living dead. My country has betrayed me, yet I have forgiven you. And every night I pray to God that somehow he'll forgive you too. Yes, even somehow he'll forgive you too. I am the unknown soldier, the one for whom